This is really a three-part talk. The first part is, if I can read the screen here, is about groups and what groups are supporting nuclear, like Heather's Mothers for Nuclear. There's a group in San Luis Obispo supporting the Diablo Canyon, the crazy attempt by PG&E to try to close Diablo Canyon. And it has nothing to do with what you think it might have to do with in terms of safety, as mentioned before. Show people what a decade of an American's life, energy-wise, is. It's this piece of uranium. This is 10 years of an American's profligate energy consumption, flying around the world, all this kind of thing. That's it. And the waste, since you split these atoms, and atoms are all the same size, is 2 of these. So is it hard to find space to store the split atoms from this? It's twice the size of this for 300 million people. I can't imagine it's hard to find a place for that. I mean, one Englishman offered to have his backyard garden as the storage place for all British nuclear waste. And that's about what you need. So at any rate, the picture on the lower left here is a Chinese can-do that's going to be built. You'll note the color of the water around it. You can tell it's from a nation that doesn't really care too much about polluting the waters around its shores. And maybe the sediment in there will increase the specific heat of the water so it can be used to cool the reactor a little more easily. I don't know. But the point is, that's Chinese can-do under construction. The right picture, as Heather will certainly recognize, is what her team runs 24/7, been there for 15 or 16 years, right? It makes electricity, the question was raised, it makes electricity for between 2.7 and 3.6 cents per kilowatt hour, and it's been doing it since 1986. And the reason that PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, thinks they should close it is because of California's crazy laws. California is not green. It is far from green. It is a gas state. The governor is invested in the gas industry. His sister is invested in the gas industry. There are 2 holding companies, Sempra Energy in Southern California and Southern California Gas, that are all related to the politics of California and the shutdown of the Songs nuclear plant down near San Diego, which is roughly the same capacity as Diablo Canyon. So California is actually remarkably politically misdirected as far as the environment and energy is concerned. And one of the reasons why, as Ripu asked that question, well, this plant makes electricity so cheaply, why would you close it? And it's clean. PG&E has already met the California standards set for 2040 or so, because this plant makes at least a quarter of the electricity that PG&E sells, and it's 0 emissions. But California has something called the Renewable Portfolio Standard, RPS, and renewable, of course, doesn't exist. There is no such thing as renewable energy. If anybody ever took science class in high school, you know that there's energy conservation, which means that once you use energy for one purpose and you've changed it into another form, you can't get it back. It's gone. That's it. Sunlight, if you don't use the sun, when it's falling on you, that energy is gone. If you don't use the wind when it's going by the windmill, it's gone. So you don't get it back. When you convert everything we use eventually ends up as low-grade heat. All the electricity we use, or charging our iPhones or using them or whatever, it ends up as low-grade heat. You'll never get the original energy back from that. That's thermodynamics. That's a fundamental principle. So the word renewable energy is meaningless. It's a marketing term, and you have to recognize that. And that's the unfortunate thing that so many environmental organizations are fooled by. They think they're green because they hear this thing about renewable energy, but there's no such thing as it. And they don't bother to think about it. And their groups, I'm a former Sierra Club member. I used to support NRDC and a bunch of the others. But their bureaucracies and the bureaucracies at the top want the money from the members, donors. And so the whole thing at the top of these organizations, nationally and internationally, is about maintaining their particular comfort, whether it's income and their positions and so forth, by keeping the members ignorant. And we tried to approach the Sierra Club board, the board of directors of the Sierra Club. We wrote letters, we submitted papers to them. They wouldn't consider changing their nuclear policy because their nuclear policy is crazy, ignorant and crazy. And when I talked with a couple of the board members at Sierra Club at that board meeting, outside the board meeting, when they had a break, they told me honestly that they were afraid of the politics at the top of the organization if they were to raise the nuclear, the devil, put it that way. The scariest time, I don't know, I'm kind of deviating from the talk, but it's important to understand that these groups, NRDC, you have to look at the finances. Like one of the NRDC, way up top, directors, whatever you call them, is invested in solar. So of course he doesn't, he wants to try to direct NRDC to be anti-nuclear, right? Anyway, so the Diablo Canyon picture represents something that's been running for all those years, generating no emissions, providing 1,000 jobs, high-level jobs, more when it's refueling, because they need extra people to help them with a refueling operation every 4 years or so. And Heather's team has produced enough electricity that its company already meets the California standards for low emissions. No other generation in California meets those standards, but that does. And that's 8% of all California's energy. So Heather's team of people on not many acres generates 8% of the world's 6th largest economy's energy with 0 emissions. Think about that. Why do you have people from NRDC, Sierra Club, Friends of the Earth? They aren't friends of the Earth, they're foes of the Earth, and others going to say we should close that kind of a source of energy that's perfectly safe, right? Doesn't make any sense, but it makes sense when you look at the organizations and see how they operate and what their management is actually doing, what they're really concerned with. In San Luis Obispo area, they've formed a group called Calilfornians for Green Nuclear Power, which is supporting the effort to prevent PG&E from closing Diablo Canyon. And Ripu and I are both technical experts for them. There are 2 other technical experts, one in LA and one at Lawrence Livermore Lab in California. And we have provided expert testimony, that's sworn testimony under oath, to the CPUC legal proceeding. And CGNP has obtained legal status in the CPUC proceeding. And I guess I actually should tell you more about that, because this is how California operates. California is about taking resources and land and converting it into cash. That's what California is. It's been that way since the gold rush, possibly before, but that's what it is right now. So there's cash available to PG&E. If this plant closes, there's cash available in the trust fund for decommissioning, a few $1 billion, which is what happened with the Southern California Edison's closure of the San Onofre nuclear plant. There's about $3 or $4 billion in that little chunk of money in the bank vault. And the way California operates, PG&E or any other utility doesn't get money from you and me as a ratepayer because of how much it costs them to make electricity. They get money from what's called CCR, capital cost recovery. So if you want to make more money as a utility in California, you build something. That's already built. Diablo Canyon's already built, right? It's been there since '86. It's already built. Okay, we write it off, whatever, we get the cash. If we build a solar farm that's 100 megawatts, we can go to the California Public Utilities Commission, which is what CGNP is a legal party to now, that we can actually testify and fight some of these things in front of the CPUC legally. I can go to the CPUC as this utility and I've built this 100 megawatt solar farm, and I can say, well, look, this is how much money I've spent. Now I need to get an increased rate. So capital cost recovery has nothing to do with how much it costs me to make the electricity that I sell. It has to do with how much I build and then go to the CPUC with and say, hey, this is why I need more money from my ratepayers. The ratepayers are paying for the investment. They're not paying for the operation, they're paying for the investment. It's truly insidious, and that's the way California law works. And California is the largest electricity market in the country as far as states go, right? So we have all these predators circling around California trying to sell into that market, and we have all the utilities trying to build to get higher rates. And that's because of this, partly because of this CCR thing. So it's absolute insanity in California as far as it. And I think if you're interested, you really should study what happened in the Great Depression. The Great Depression, utility companies were held by holding companies, and the same thing happened then that happened in 2008 for investment banks and so forth. They were allowed to create investments that had no meaning. And so the holding company that PG&E has a holding company. It's called PG&E. So that means that they can take the money away from the utility and not put it in new plants if we needed it. And of course we don't need new plants because we have the CCR already. So the utility can already go and build whatever it wants, even if it's not going to use it, and get a higher rate from us, right? So we can get charged for that. And in fact, California, if you look at the statistics, California is an excellent example to look at of how bad things can be. Because turns out, there's a Los Angeles Times article about this not long ago, we have over 74 gigawatts of generating capability. If you go to the California ISO and look every day, you'll see what the wind and solar and the energy demands are, and then you'll see the base load, which is about 20 gigawatts, 15, 20 gigawatts every day, 24/7. We have 74 gigawatts. Well, what's all that other stuff? Well, that other stuff is the CCR. You know, they've built plants that they can get an increased rate from the investment, but they don't use them. California hasn't really done anything to protect itself from this holding company act repeal. And so that's why, one of the reasons why we suddenly have a perfectly good nuclear plant in Southern California, San Onofre, being shut down, simply because its steam generators were designed improperly by Mitsubishi. But at any rate, the point is that there's no reason for California to have the problems that it has had, and there's no reason for California to have the issues that it has with clean energy. And so the anti-nuclear folks in California have been very successful over the years because they got a bill passed that says the nuclear waste from plants, if it's not taken by the federal government, you can't build another nuclear plant. So we can't build any more nuclear plants, but we can shut them down, right? So, and one of so that's kind of crazy. But California gives you a view into how ridiculous things can get when politics and business interact that is not in the public interest. And so our effort to support Diablo Canyon through CGNP is exploiting the California Public Utilities Commission's key reason for existence. And it says right in their charter, they have to act in the public interest. And so we're saying in legal terms, we're testifying with proving that you cannot substitute solar and wind for a nuclear plant. No matter how many solar and wind farms you build, you can't do it. And so you're not doing something in the public interest by closing down a zero emissions plant that does run 24/7, that has run since 1986 and will continue to run for another 20 or 40 years without any serious issues. And the shutdown would be 2024, 2025. And the CPUC is not a real court, but it acts like a court. It's an administrative law judge that runs like a court. So CGNP could also give you the ability to understand why, in more or less layman's terms, so the judge would understand, for instance, why solar and wind, et cetera, are not renewable and why they cannot replace power from a nuclear plant no matter how much you build. So that's something to put in front of the face of somebody who says from any environmental group that nuclear is not what we want. When you consider, the other thing you consider is energy density. Remember the little piece of uranium I hold up as an American's energy life for a decade. Well, you can't match that with wind and solar in any way. And you can't match that with fuels. Taking a cubic mile of oil, portion it out to individual people, per year, you can't match that. Because nuclear power is 1 million times more energy dense on a pound for pound basis than any fuel, more than 1 million times more energy dense than anything like solar or wind. Because wind, remember, is second order derived energy from the sun. It's the effect of the sun heating up the atmosphere and creating wind currents and so forth, and currents in the ocean and interacting with the wind, and wind interacting with the ocean and so forth. So wind energy is a very low energy density source, and it's so low in energy density you would say, why bother trying to use it? And as an engineer or a scientist, that's what you would say. But if you're getting a subsidy, like Warren Buffett gets a production tax credit for his investments in wind farms, and you don't care about the environment, and you're not a scientist or engineer, but you just want to make money, then okay, it's fine. In fact, in 2014, Warren Buffett gave an interview in which he said they wouldn't do wind farms without the production tax credit because, as he said, it makes no sense. And so that basically the point they have to get across to these folks who actually think there's such a thing as renewable energy, or that it's wind and solar are green, is that it makes no sense. It makes no sense to pick the worst, lowest energy density sources. It requires 2,000 tons of raw material to make one windmill.
And here, we don't just dream, we make history by nearly doubling our clean energy as part of our 100% renewable vision.
It requires 2,000 tons of raw material to make one windmill. One windmill that will deliver 1 megawatt of power averaged over a year. Or for iron ore, coal, because you can't make steel without coal, limestone, crushed, kiln to make concrete, rock, all the stuff that goes into a single windmill is about 2,000 tons per average megawatt ever delivered. And all that 2,000 tons is processed with fossil fuel. Everything is processed with fossil fuel, transported to the site and erected with fossil fuel, right? So one of the best videos I have used with people is a promotional video from Mid-American Energy, which makes large windmills. And it's a video of them constructing one from the ground, from the nice flat prairie in North Dakota or somewhere, digging it up, putting in this huge concrete base, erecting these, buying these huge sections of the tower from China and shipping them over and transporting them to where the base is and erecting it and going up 400 feet. And really, it's exhilarating to see the whole thing. Huge cranes, bigger than any crane you'd ever seen, putting it up. And then you think, well, why have I wasted all this material and land on something that's only going to give me some energy, a little bit of energy when the wind blows, right? And it's always going to be there. It's going to be there for our descendants to look at and say, boy, these people were stupid. And now we got to recycle all this crap. And we're never going to be able to dig up the concrete that they put down there under our prairie soil, right? It's going to be there forever. So, you know, the whole thing is an example of how human thinking can be distracted. And then the next section is about ocean problems update, which is really the most dangerous, fast approaching problem. 2100 IPCC temperature targets are meaningless if by 2050 oceans are dead and the planet has lost 15% of all human food protein because of that. So that's one of the key things that I try to get across to people, is that the ocean problems, which have been ignored largely by IPCC, are actually the things that are going to be driving serious environmental problems around the world, everywhere.
In 1942, underneath the University of Chicago's football stadium, a group of scientists led by Enrico Fermi built the world's first nuclear reactor. The reactor was built out of graphite blocks, some of which contained small disks of uranium. Fermi knew if they arranged the blocks correctly, it would produce a self-sustaining nuclear reaction. A sphere would have been the best shape for the reactor, but Fermi's team couldn't build a perfect sphere out of rectangular blocks, and they weren't sure exactly how big the reactor needed to be.